This AgVision program is made possible through the generous support of Syngenta Seeds NK brand. The results you need, the freedom to choose. And by Farms.com. Ag news, market prices, ag careers, and farm real estate. You'll find it all at Farms.com.
Well, despite today's separation between farming and food, or perhaps because of it, there is a growing interest in community-based food systems. Those are the words from a report authored in part by our next guest. Dr. Michael Hamm directs the CS Mott Group for Sustainable Food Systems at Michigan State University and joins us today from East Lansing. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you.
I want to ask you about that statement in a moment, but first a clarification of this term community food system, or sometimes called local. The concept that you're talking about is much more than simply delivering food products to a local farmer's market.
Absolutely, and I think it's important to say that they're community-based food systems, and the fundamental basis in that is that communities are relying much more on their local resources to provide the food needed by the community. That certainly doesn't mean that there's no trade, that we don't get coffee from the tropics, that we don't get fruits from tropical areas and things like that. What it does mean is that we maximize the use of our local resources in a sustainable way so that we both keep them and use them wisely, and so that they're there for future generations.
Some of your material describes this as a dynamic, interconnected circle. What does all that mean?
Well, what it means is that if you think about the food system, what we typically think about is that there's farmers and there's consumers. The reality is that there's also all kinds of activities in between. I live in Michigan, which has a winter. We don't have a 12-month growing season. You're in Ontario, which also doesn't have a 12-month growing season. And so we rely on processing. We rely on people to distribute. Not all of our food comes from farmers markets, nor will it ever all come from farmers markets. So we rely on distributors to get it to grocery stores, to make it more convenient for people to get. And all of those things are actually connected into a cycle, because in a really sustainable system, the waste that comes from consumers, all the produce, the peelings from carrots and potatoes and whatnot, ultimately should be recycled back into the production of that food.
Now, so let's go back to that opening statement. You're suggesting there is a growing interest in community-based food systems. Are there any studies out there to support that consumers are interested in this subject?
Sure. Well, let's start with the part of it that is a provisioning from local sources of food. And at least what I'm really familiar with is the United States. And in the United States, a number of states have state marketing programs. In Michigan, it's Select Michigan. In New Jersey, it's Jersey Fresh. In Vermont, it's Vermont Grown. So there's all kinds of different state marketing programs. And studies looking at those programs in Delaware, in Maine, in Tennessee, in New Jersey, in Oklahoma, I believe, have shown that over half of consumers have said that they would preferentially purchase produce that has their state label on it. There's only a couple studies where it's been less than a majority of the population have said that. Now, most people also say that they don't want to pay more for it. They think that they should be paying about the same. In some cases, they think that they should be paying less. And in fact, the experience of a lot of people at farmers markets is that consumers are pretty savvy. And many of them, some of them in studies have said, look, I've compared the cost of produce in my local supermarket compared to the cost of the farmer's market. And the farmer's market is either the same or cheaper. And I think it's better, so I'm going to buy there.
So are you suggesting that consumers are telling us that there's something about a local food system that they will actually put preferential bias against, or is it really an educational system that we need to convince them that it is something they should prefer?
It's both. There is a growing number of consumers, a growing percentage of consumers who have already made the choice that if they can, they'll purchase local. In some cases, if they can, they'll purchase organic. The consumer surveys that are out there show that a large percentage of consumers are looking for these traits in their food. There's also a large percentage of the consumers that aren't there yet. So it's actually a two-pronged. It's making sure that there's a supply for those people who have already made a commitment that this is what I want to do. I want to support my community. I want to support my state. I want to support my province. And educational programs in the schools, in communities about the value of making these choices. And then it's also about having our governments have policies in place that support these kind of things. In the United States, our farm policy is very geared towards a few commodity crops. We actually have very little policy that supports the production of fruits and vegetables, for example.
Now, how have Michigan farmers reacted to this? Are they starting to see some benefit here, or are they skeptical?
Again, I think it's fair to say it's both. I think there's a growing number of farmers that are seeing the potential value in this. If you look at the growth of farmers markets in Michigan, it pretty much parallels the United States in general. In the last 10 years, there's been about a doubling in the number of farmers markets. We stand at about 160 farmers markets today in Michigan. On the other hand, we have pretty good information from conferences that some of the people in my group have spoken at and discussions with community leaders around the state. But there's probably demand right now for about 60 more farmers markets in the state, and we probably don't have the farmers to service all those farmers markets. So on the one hand, there is a growing cohort of farmers that are looking at how can I market and use local as a marketing tool. And then there's a long way that we still have to go. There's another example out there right now, which is the Michigan asparagus industry. The Michigan asparagus industry historically has been canned asparagus. And if you look at the consumption trends in canned asparagus, it's a downward curve, where the consumption trend in fresh asparagus is an upward curve. We grow great asparagus on the western side of the state in those sandy soils that line Lake Michigan. And in the last 4 years, there has been a doubling in the sale of fresh market asparagus, fresh market Michigan asparagus, and most of that has been through the Select Michigan campaign. So it's people going into the grocery stores for the most part and choosing Michigan-labeled fresh asparagus.
If you were going to go into a meeting this afternoon and convince a bunch of farmers, for instance, that this had value, what sort of benefits would you lay on the table to say this is why we should do this?
Well, for some farmers, it's probably not going to be the thing that they want to do. I mean, I think Ontario is similar to Michigan. The majority of the acreage out there is in commodity groups. Here it's corn, wheat, and soybeans. And that's what the vast majority of our acreage is. But we have significant acreage in fruits and vegetables. Most of those, for what I would tell Michigan growers, is most of those fruits and vegetables historically have been for the processing sector. We are losing the processing sector. We used to produce a lot of apple juice. Apple juice is lost to Chinese concentrate coming in. And so the apple industry really needs to think about how do we shift to a fresh market industry if we're going to survive. What I'd say to them is the results of a study that we recently published looking at what would it do for job creation in the state of Michigan if we shifted from a processing industry to a fresh market industry. And what we found is that in Michigan alone, we could probably create about 2,000 more jobs in the state by selling fresh market instead of selling processing, simply because farmers have more money in their pockets that they would spend in the economy. And so the first thing that I would say to farmers is that instead of getting 10 or 15 cents on the food dollar, if they go wholesale, they're probably going to get 30 to 50 cents on the food dollar. And if they go direct market, they're going to get 95 cents to $1 on the food dollar. So they stand to make more money.
Now, one of the things you've suggested is that precondition of this type of a system working is something you call the participation of well-informed food citizens. And when a farmer would hear that, they might roll their eyes and go, wow, where do you get those? I mean, that sounds like a big barrier to success.
Well, sometimes when I hear that, I roll my eyes too and say, where do you get those? Because in many ways, that's an academic term. What it really means is that when people go into the marketplace, I think of it as going into the marketplace and having a very simple triage method in my mind when I shop. So the first thing that I look for when I go into the marketplace is it local and is it organic? I like to support local and I like to support organic production. If I can't get that, can I get local? That's my second choice. If I can't get that, can I get organic or can I get conventional from somewhere else? So it's a pretty simple process when you go in. And so I think the educated citizen part, or the educated consumer part, is that people, when they go into the marketplace, they have a very simple process they can use to make decisions that help support the local economy. And it's a really simple concept that in Michigan we have 3.8 million families. If those families spent $10 more a week on Michigan agricultural products, that's $38 million in the economy. In 2005, the best estimate is that there was about $37 million of direct market sales of Michigan fruits and Michigan food products. So every family in Michigan simply spending $10 in a week is more than the annual sales of Fresh Market in Michigan right now. So there's huge potential out there for consumers to make very simple choices. The other thing that I would say is that one of the things that we need to think about is who's going to farm in the next generation. I think that's a real issue. The age of the farmers is going up, and to do this kind of production is not the simplest thing in the world, because it's not just about the producing. It's also about the marketing and thinking about what's the value that I'm adding to this product to get it to the consumer. And that in some ways takes a different kind of producer. And so the other thing that I would argue that citizens, residents of the province, of the provinces or of the states play a big role in is encouraging their elected officials to think about policies that would develop programs that would encourage a next generation of farmers to produce in this way, to think about and to produce for the legacy that we're leaving the next generation. I have an 8-year-old daughter. Tomorrow I turn 55. And I think about when she's 55, what kind of world is she going to have? And is she going to have a world in which she can get the kinds of food products that I can go out and get today? And I hope so. But unless citizens of the provinces, of Canada, or of the United States are actively saying to the policymakers and to their legislators that you need to ensure that this land is used well, that there's people that can work that land that have the knowledge and skills to sustain the soil, to sustain the water resources for our daughters and our sons when they're 50 and 55.
Well, you're very passionate about this, and the more I hear you speak, it becomes clear that as you look at the food system from a different perspective, you do see possibilities that might never come to mind. Dr. Mike Hamm, thanks for your time on this.
You're welcome, and thanks very much.